Fiends, gremlins, canimits, lend me your ears. My name is Craig, and you're listening to Between Light and Shadow, the podcast that stumbles confusedly and sometimes drunkenly through the skewed passageways and impenetrably dark corners of the Twilight Zone and demands answers. Or at the very least, raises a tentative hand and meekly asks where the bathroom is. This week, the question we're posing is brief and to the point.
Where is everybody?
Not exactly the question you want to be asking when you're starting a new podcast, or a new TV series for that matter. You know, it's hard to believe that the Twilight Zone was ever new. It's been a part of pop culture for so long that it feels like it must have always been around. It's like a comet killed the dinosaurs, cavemen invented fire, and the Twilight Zone was already on the air when the first TV was invented. Now, it's probably not necessary to explain what the Twilight Zone is, since anyone listening to this podcast is probably not just aware of it, but is actually quite enamored with it. I mean, why would someone listen to a podcast about something that they were ignorant about or ambivalent about? I don't know, is podcast roulette a thing? Just pick one at random and go with it? Now, we'll talk in the weeks to come about the different aspects of the show and the recurring themes that it explored, but here's how creator Rod Serling described it during pre-production before it premiered. This is something I've wanted to do for years. Television hasn't touched it yet. Sure, there have been science fiction and fantasy shows before, but most of them were involved with gadgets or leprechauns. The Twilight Zone is about people. About human beings involved in extraordinary circumstances, in strange problems of their own or of fate's making. Here's what the program isn't. It's not a monster rally or a spook show. There will be nothing formulaed in it, nothing telegraphed, nothing so nostalgically familiar that an audience can usually join the actors in duets. Yeah, I know. My Serling impersonation is mediocre at best. So, okay. The show wasn't intended to be traditional sci-fi or fantasy or horror, but if you must put labels on it, those three probably work best. What Serling and company did so well was to blend those genres, and maybe that's why the Twilight Zone is so unique. Horror is probably the least represented genre of the three, or is it? I guess that depends on how you define horror. Now, if your horror is blood and guts and demons and hockey mask wearing psychopaths, then no, not so much. But what's the one necessary element for any horror story? TV show, movie, book, presidential debate, whatever. It's got to be scary, right? So fear. Almost every single episode of The Twilight Zone in some way depicts fear. Fear of death, fear of the dark, fear of change, fear of tyranny, fear of technology, fear of other people. But there's one fear that underlines all of those: the unknown, that which we don't understand. Now here's the real Rod Serling talking about it, and yeah, his Serling impersonation is way better than mine.
In making a judgment or any analysis or inventory of what are the degrees of emotional reaction and indeed types of emotional reactions, I think there is a universality of reaction to certain given prods. Now, our reaction of fear to a mugging, I think, is relatively universal. There may be 8 different types of reactions, but I think you could almost categorize them and put them in paragraph form and put them in a textbook. The worst fear of all is the fear of the unknown working on you, which you cannot share with others. To me, that's the most nightmarish of the stimuli.
And that is the very essence of the darker side of the Twilight Zone. Something inexplicable and impossible happens. Reality goes tilt, logic goes out the window, and for some reason only you know about it. And if you tell somebody, well, they'll probably think you're crazy. And you don't want to end up in a straitjacket, right? So you clam up, at least at first. And that choice to not involve others can actually work as a kind of psychological life raft of sorts, because that much you do have control over. But the longer this snag in the fabric of time and space drags on, and the more crushing the isolation becomes, at some point you just have to tell someone. You no longer care if they believe you. You just need to say it out loud for someone to hear, in the hopes that you'll receive, at the very least, sympathy, if not understanding or an explanation for what's happening to you. It's like a hug in the middle of a cyclone. But what if you didn't even have that option? What if you were assailed by strange forces, supernatural or otherwise, threatening your presumed place in the universe, undermining your understanding of who or what you are, and there was nobody you could turn to? What if you were completely and utterly alone? The very first Twilight Zone protagonist ever was just that, completely and utterly alone. This is his story. We open on a shot of a guy walking down a road. We don't know who he is, and as it happens, neither does he. He's come down with a bad case of the amnesia plot device. He arrives in a small town called Oakwood and finds all the usual signs of occupation. Pies are baking in a diner oven, a lit cigar lies smoldering in an ashtray, water is running in a sink. The thing is, there aren't any people to be found. None whatsoever. He's like Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver. He's God's lonely man. Or I guess Rod's lonely man is more appropriate here. Now, our mystery man bums around town, has a couple of minor misadventures, and becomes increasingly agitated as he searches for somebody to talk to. More problematic is the pervasive feeling that someone or something is watching him. He meanders on over to the local movie theater and sees a poster that provides him with a clue to his identity. The guy on the poster is wearing the same jumpsuit as him.
Air Force. Air Force. Air Force. I'm Air Force.
So, okay, he's in the Air Force. Not that it makes a damn bit of difference, since just a few minutes later he's running amok in the streets. He collides with a crosswalk post and desperately, almost instinctively, starts pressing the signal button.
Please, somebody help me. Help me. Please, somebody help me. Help me. Help me. Help me. Please help me. Help me. Help me. Please, somebody help me.
And just like that, the illusion is shattered. His name is Mike Ferris, and he's an astronaut in training. He's the subject of an experiment to test the limits of man's ability to cope with the loneliness associated with extended space travel. His entire experience in Oakwood has been an elaborate hallucination, a psychological break brought on by his prolonged isolation. The walk button was actually a panic button inside an enclosed mock-up of a space capsule, where he's been imprisoned for 484 hours, 36 minutes. Now that's 20 days or so. I'd probably lose my shit too if I was locked inside a tiny box for 3 weeks. This was just the test run.
Next time it won't be just a box and a hanger, will it?
No, Mike. Next time you'll really be alone.
Where Is Everybody was written by Rod Serling, directed by Robert Stevens, and stars Earl Holliman as Mike Ferris. It's a landmark episode, not necessarily because it's particularly great in and of itself, but because it was this piece of film that convinced CBS to greenlight the series. It was also the very first episode to air on October 2nd, 1959, exactly 57 years ago today. If you're listening to this on October 2nd, 2016, that is. Now, there were other episodes in the can by then. They could have premiered the show with Walking Distance or The Lonely, which to me are two superior episodes, but they chose this one. And you know, it does make some sense. It serves as a gentle introduction of sorts to the series. It has that Twilight Zone feel, but it's not explicitly supernatural. No robots, no time travel, no deals with the devil, no aliens, no future dystopian societies. It's just a man without a memory, a town without people, and a perfectly rational explanation at the end to tie it all up with a nice, neat bow so as not to upset Middle America. The choice to open the series with a story about an amnesiac actually works on a meta level too, because those who were watching it in 1959 were blank slates right along with Mike. What's this newfangled Twilight Zone show? What's going on? What's it all about?
Look, I don't want you to think I'm nuts or anything. It's nothing like that. It's just that, well, it's just that I don't seem to remember who I am. Well, it's a real oddball thing, but when I woke up this morning, I didn't exactly wake up. I just found myself out on that road walking. Amnesia. Isn't that what they call it? Well, that must be what I got, because I just don't remember a thing, and I can't seem to find anybody to ask.
The loss or misplacement of one's identity is one of the Twilight Zone's more disturbing themes. Mike's line, "I don't know who I am," while its perfunctory delivery may not be terribly compelling, perfectly sums up this particularly potent plight. And yeah, that's right, that's 3 plosives in a row. This podcast is basically fearless. That's such a powerful idea because, well, who are we without our memories? Our individual experiences form who we are, our sense of self. And you take that away and we're really nobodies. We can immediately sympathize with someone in this situation because we know how horrific it would be to lose who we are, where we've been, who we've loved, what we've accomplished. But do we actually sympathize with Mike? You know, honestly, I don't know. He never seems that upset over what's happening. And when he finally breaks down, it's more due to his paranoia about being watched, not his amnesia. And beyond that, well, he's not really that likable, which makes it kind of tough to care. Not likable, you ask? Listeners, I submit to you that Mike Ferris is not only unlikable, he's a bit of a dick. Now, before you reach for your pitchforks and blaze up your torches, let's see if he passes the dick test. Memory-challenged Mike enters the cafe and immediately yells for service like a jackass, then hops over the counter and saunters into the kitchen like he owns the place.
You dick!
He then proceeds to break their little desk clock and leaves the glass shards on the floor for somebody to step on.
You dick!
A few minutes later, he gets all creepy and pervy and comes onto a female mannequin.
You dick!
Mike's identity may be a mystery at this point, but it's pretty evident that whoever he is, yeah, he's kind of a tool. The dick test confirms it, and the dick test does not lie. Now, in all fairness, he's actually not quite as dickish after the first 5 minutes, but it doesn't really matter because by then he's become unlikable for an entirely different reason. He constantly talks to himself. Out loud. You know, it would be acceptable, even appropriate, if this was a radio show or a stage play, but it's not. It's a film. So his relentless monologuing throughout the entire episode is clunky and awkward. And then we go from Dick to Dickens. Hey, nice segue.
I just remembered something. Scrooge said it. You remember Scrooge, old buddy, Ebenezer Scrooge? That's what he said to that ghost, Jacob Marley. He said, "You may be an undigested bit of beef, a crumb of cheese, a blot of mustard, a fragment of an undone potato. But there's more of gravy than of grave about you. You see, that's what you are. You're what I had for dinner last night. You must be."
I propose a compromise. He can talk out loud to the mannequin, and he can holler at random intervals while he's looking for people, but otherwise, damn it, Mike, have the common courtesy to convey your inner monologue via pre-recorded voiceover like a normal person, right? How much more effective would this episode be if we heard his thoughts instead of his voice? Now me, I'm constantly delivering a silent monologue all day long. Maybe that should be a podcast.
Please, no.
Hey, you don't have to be in here while I'm doing this, you know.
Oh, I know.
Oh, where was I? Oh, okay. So Mike's also a bit of a doofus, a clumsy doofus. And he manages to get himself stuck in a phone booth, which is famously an autobiographical detail from Serling's own life. But that doesn't make it any less doofusy. As Act 2 ramps up to its climax, he seems to be deliberately crashing into stuff. First, he runs right into a gigantic mirror, even though he can see himself in it. He then runs outside and trips over a bicycle, even though we can clearly see him glance down at it right before he awkwardly dives into it. I guess young Earl Holliman hadn't quite learned how to hit his marks without looking at them yet. You probably couldn't tell on the tiny TVs of 1959, but in this age of big screen TVs and high definition, it's impossible to miss. And the episode is really dull in spots. Now, before you accuse me of having a short attention span, allow me to point out I've sat through 2001: A Space Odyssey at least 10 times in my life, and I've stuck it out every single time. I'm not averse to slow-moving narratives, but this one does get a bit boring here and there. Hey, you don't have to agree with me. You know, you can start your own Twilight Zone podcast, like everybody else has apparently, and give it an A+. I didn't say it was boring. I said it was boring in spots. It also suffers from some pacing issues. Mike's gradual breakdown isn't so much an escalation as a roller coaster. The sequence of events is as follows. He wanders around town, almost gets locked in a phone booth, gets a little upset, then calms down and wanders around some more, then almost gets himself locked in a jail cell, which makes him upset enough to break the fourth wall and yell directly into the camera,
Where is everybody?
Then he calms down again, he enjoys an ice cream sundae, he mopes around until dark, he catches a flick, and then he just straight up supernovas. I think a straighter incline from 0 to 100 would have been way more effective. This probably could have been done in post. Just, rearrange the scenes. I should try this myself. A fan edit kind of thing. Maybe. Mike's ultimate unhinging is pretty effective once it does happen, but not as effective as it could have been had the build-up been cleaner. And I hate to say it, and I'm probably going to take some flack for this, but Earl Holliman doesn't exactly do it for me here. I do like him in other stuff. He's great as Cookie in Forbidden Planet, for example, but here, man, I don't know. He's not terrible, don't get me wrong. He's just kind of awkward. Actually, Forbidden Planet is a great comparison. He couldn't have possibly commanded the mission to Altair 4. Leslie Nielsen has the authoritative voice and the square jaw required for that, so the Earl of Holliman was the aw shucks, I sure do love whiskey comedy relief. And that works, but I can't quite buy him as the Major Matt Mason type, which he'd have to be to get the coveted moon mission, right? He doesn't strike me as even being military at all, but he actually did serve in the Navy for a year when he was 17. He was discharged when they found out he'd lied about his age to get in. Bro, high five. I've got to admire the balls on this guy.
Yeah, I'll bet you do.
Hey, I'm secure enough in my sexuality to admire another man's... You leave me alone. I think the best description of Mike Ferris is everyman. And Holliman is a perfectly serviceable everyman. And it's perfectly appropriate, maybe even preferable, for an everyman to be the first Twilight Zone protagonist, since a more generic type would be easier to identify with. But not if that protagonist is ultimately revealed to be a spaceman spiff-type astronaut training for such a precise and dangerous and historic mission. As portrayed, Mike comes across more blue-collar than right stuff. And that movie poster he identifies with depicts an Air Force flagman directing ground traffic, not a pilot. So, if Mike was maybe a grease monkey instead and had volunteered for the experiment, now yeah, I'd totally buy that. Now that I'm thinking about this, it seems strange that the actual astronaut chosen for the moon mission is the subject of the experiment at all. Wouldn't they try the extended isolation test on somebody else to protect their top guy in case it results in a catastrophic meltdown, which it does? And doesn't it seem like maybe Mike's crack-up would perhaps disqualify him for the mission? We're given the impression that he's still going regardless. Now, the episode never tells us Mike's rank, but when Serling rewrote the teleplay as a short story later, he specified that Mike is a sergeant. Now, this is probably my ignorance of military chains of command talking, but would a sergeant even be piloting the mission to begin with? Aren't they usually lieutenant colonels or at least majors? Can a non-officer command and pilot a spacecraft if it's a military mission, which this one is? Astronauts, please chime in. Serling was in the Army, so I'm sure he'd know better than me on this point. Still bugs me, though. Yeah, I know. I'm really busting this poor episode's chops. I do get that it's a pilot, and any new show is going to exhibit a few gawky growing pains before it hits its stride. And that includes podcasts. So, yeah, maybe cut me some slack while I'm working out the bugs. And speaking of bugs, I'm a sucker for bugs showing up in movies and TV shows. Now, I don't mean intentional bugs like swarms of bees or locusts or whatever, but the ones that just sort of show up in the shot like they own the place. When Mike is macking on the mannequin partway into Act 1, a fly very visibly buzzes in and lands nearby. Now, either nobody noticed or nobody thought it was something that needed fixing. Something else that probably wasn't visible on the TVs of the time. But it's interesting to note that when Serling adapted his teleplay for a short story, he added a bit where Mike notices the complete lack of flies in Oakwood. Maybe that was Serling's way of getting revenge on the little guy for fucking up the shot. Now, beyond that cute little fly cameo, there are things I do like about the episode. The atmospheric opening shot, where we see Mike ambling aimlessly down a dirt road, seemingly from out of a fog. I like to think that the fog represents the hazy edges of Mike's dream, and there's actually nothing beyond Oakwood's outskirts, except maybe Mike's gray matter. And there's a nice, expansive feel to Oakwood thanks to the use of Courthouse Square on the Universal backlot. It feels like a real town. You probably know it better as Hill Valley from Back to the Future, but it actually shows up in lots of movies. It Came from Outer Space, Tarantula, The Monolith Monsters, To Kill a Mockingbird, Psycho 2, the list goes on and on. I really dig the bit where Mike walks through the paperback book racks in the drugstore and spins each of them. It's something I totally used to do when I'd look at comic books at the grocery store as a kid. You can actually pick out several titles. The Green Odyssey by Philip Jose Farmer, The World of Susie Wong by Richard Mason, On the Road by Jack Kerouac, and an entire rack of something called The Last Man on Earth, which doesn't list an author because it isn't an actual book. Now, there was a film called The Last Man on Earth in 1964, which was adapted from the 1954 novel I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, who wrote many great Twilight Zones, by the way. But it's not the same book, which is too bad, because that would have been a really cool little trivia item. I did find a color replica of the fake book on a website called yourprops.com. Google it. It's actually pretty cool looking. They also have replicas of the Oakwood phone book and the Oakwood high school basketball team schedule, but they don't have a replica of the movie poster that jogged Mike's memory, which is too bad. And incidentally, that movie poster is advertising a real movie, 1957's Battle Hymn starring Rock Hudson, who unfortunately never appeared on The Twilight Zone. But it does co-star Dan Duryea, who did show up in the third episode of the first season, Mr. Denton on Doomsday, which we'll be covering eventually. And I really love our first look at the military brass in charge of the experiment. The slow pan across them as they silently and expressionlessly watch Mike go to pieces on a remote monitor. That's easily the best, most effective shot in the entire episode, though it does crack me up that they wait so long before finally intervening. He pressed the panic button, right? Shouldn't they be expediting getting his ass out of that box? I mean, what good is a panic button if... Well, we have panic buttons in the office where I work, and I really hope that if I ever need to press it, help will come quickly, and there won't be a panel of suits watching me on a security monitor someplace before they finally decide to help me. Let's see, what else do I like about the episode? Oh, I love the original music score by Bernard Herrmann, which is typical Herrmann, which is to say it's excellent. It's appropriately moody and dramatic, weighty without overwhelming the action. And much of the music is based around a simple 3-note phrase. which Herman repeatedly comes back to, using different combinations of instruments to vary the mood. Here's a different one. And another. And still another. I mean, there's other stuff going on too, but a lot of the score is just variations on that one tiny little phrase. Lots of Herman stuff is like that, just short bits that repeat over and over and kind of mutate as they go. Kind of like all the loop-based electronic stuff nowadays. Trance, ambient, house, dubstep, drums and bass, trip-hop. It's like he's the grandfather of it all.
Where is everybody? Where is everybody?
In fact, there's a 5-volume collection from Brain Disco's Records that came out last year called Roots of Electronica, and wouldn't you know it, a Herman track shows up. It's on the 5th volume. It's the opening cue from his score for 1951's The Day the Earth Stood Still. Where Is Everybody went through some cosmetic changes between when CBS first bought it and when it actually went on the air. The big difference is that Rod Serling didn't narrate it. Instead, Westbrook Van Voorhees was used. He's best remembered as the voice of The March of Time, the long-running radio, newsreel, and television series.
The March of Time brings you each week at this hour an authoritative report on the people, the problems, and the places which will make tomorrow's news and become a significant part of the history of our time. This is Westbrook Van Voorhees, inviting you to join us again on this channel at the same hour next week, when the editors of The March of Time will present another chapter in the March of Time television series.
Well, that's a great voice for news. However,
there is a sixth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the sunlight of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area that might be called the Twilight Zone. The place is here. The time is now, and the journey into the shadows that we are about to watch could be our journey.
yeesh, it's so stiff. Not that kind of stiff. It almost sounds like it's being read phonetically by someone who doesn't know English, like the emphases are all off. So that clearly wasn't going to work. Orson Welles was also considered, but he was too expensive. And as much as I love Welles, I don't think he would have been a good fit here. Rod Serling ended up taking the hosting reins as a last resort, and history was made. Other than that, some scenes were snipped to bring the episode down to the requisite 25 minutes. The opening scene in the cafe is longer and actually reveals Mike to be an even bigger douche. He starts singing loudly and obnoxiously, apparently for no other reason than to amuse himself.
If a body greet a body coming through the rye, if a body meet a body, need a body cry.
You dick!
There's also a scene at the start of Act 2 where Mike is walking through Oakwood, smoking a cigarette and repeatedly looking behind him. It's actually a nice demonstration of his growing paranoia, so it's a shame that that was cut. Now, a bit later, after he sees the book rack full of Last Man on Earth paperbacks, he goes outside and hollers repeatedly, which is totally redundant and was wisely chopped. What else? Oh, the font used for the end credits is different. It's not the Bernard Modern that we all know and love. It's something bland and generic. And the font in the opening title sequence isn't the same either. It's sort of a cheesy early sci-fi deal. And it's just Twilight Zone without the, which is an eerie portent of things to come when the would be dropped for seasons 4 and 5. Okay, maybe that's not eerie exactly. And listen to me droning on about fonts like it makes a goddamn bit of difference. When the X-Files came out on Blu-ray last year, some dude on the home theater forum was actually pissed that the high-def recreation of the opening titles had a slightly different font than the original version. That's not even a first world problem. That's just... man, I don't even know what to call that. Now let's talk a bit about Mike's amnesia, before I forget. Amnesia has got to be the most overused plot device in all of TV. Or maybe it's just a coincidence that all the shows I've loved over the years have relied upon it at some point. The Incredible Hulk did it. The Fugitive did it. Twin Peaks did it. The Greatest American Hero did it. The X-Files did it. Star Trek did it. Full House did it. According to my daughter, anyway. I'm not familiar with the magical unicorn wonderfulness that apparently is Full House. And that's just off the top of my head. Oh, and even The Outer Limits did it. Remember Demon with a Glass Hand with Robert Culp? It's almost obligatory that the longer a show is on the air, at least one major character is going to lose their memory at some point. And don't even get me started on soap operas. God.
Wait, didn't you used to watch Days of Our Lives?
I fail to see how that's relevant here.
Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't know why Bo and Kayla broke up?
I wouldn't know.
Are you sure?
I'm, really sure.
I don't know. It kind of seems like maybe you know more than you're letting on.
God damn it. Bo and Kayla never broke up because they were never a couple because they're siblings. Bo was married to Hope, Kayla was married to Steve, a.k.a. Patch, but now both couples are divorced because nobody ever stays together on soap operas. There! Are you happy?
Mm-hmm. Yep, pretty much.
I walked right into that. I must be losing my edge. So like I said, Whereas Everybody gets wrapped up in the end with no loose ends a-dangling and no mystery left unexplained, which is a bit odd for a series that is so well remembered for its unresolvedness and frequent twist endings. But again, this is the pilot, so the format wasn't 100% solidified yet. The history does report that Serling wasn't entirely satisfied with it for that very reason, the complete lack of a twist ending. So when he rewrote it as a short story, he added a bit in which Mike grabs a ticket stub on his way into the movie theater. And later, after he wakes up, he finds the stub in his pocket. Wait, what? What? How? But the existence of the ticket stub would seem to indicate that Oakwood is in fact an actual physical location, not just a setting in a dream. Further, the fact that Mike possesses said ticket would seem to indicate that he actually went to Oakwood, like physically went there. So, does that mean it wasn't a dream at all? Did he somehow astral project himself there without ever actually leaving the comfort of his isolation box? If so, why? What's the point? Maybe this wasn't just a pre-moonshot isolation test. Maybe underneath it's a super secret CIA remote viewing experiment to see if extreme isolation can force the human mind to access hidden abilities, up to and including transcending the bounds of time and space, and maybe even slip between the intricate lattices that form reality as we know it. Insert plug for the Netflix original series Stranger Things here. Or fuck, maybe it's just a shock ending for shock ending's sake. Now I prefer the ending as presented in the original episode. I don't need things to always end all tidy and crystal clear, but in this case, yeah, I kind of do. I choose to ignore Serling's retcon job. It wasn't in the episode proper, so it's not canon. And yes, before you ask, I will only watch the original theatrical versions of the Star Wars trilogy. George Lucas can suck my lightsaber. In any case, the lack of a twist ending clearly bugged him. Serling, not George Lucas. And adding that controversial ticket stub didn't quite squash that particular bug. So what's a guy to do? Well, if you're Rod Serling, you just write another script that's basically the same story with a few cosmetic changes, and you make damn sure it doesn't make sense at the end. We skip ahead now to September 30th, 1960, almost 1 year to the day after Where Is Everybody premiered. The Twilight Zone kicks off its second season with King 9 Will Not Return. Written by Serling, directed by Buzz Kulik. This is his first directing job on the show. He'll go on to do 8 more episodes. It stars Robert Cummings, who was a much bigger star at the time than Earl Holliman, so the show must have racked up some prestige during that first year on the air. Cummings plays Captain James Embry, another Air Force pilot. Only this guy doesn't wake up in a strange town. He wakes up in the African desert next to the wreckage of his B-25 bomber, the eponymous King 9. He surveys the wreckage, recalling that a stray bullet in a fuel tank caused the crash. But how did he end up outside of the plane, unconscious? It's a bit of a mystery. The bigger mystery, however, is the fact that there's virtually no sign of his crew. Like Mike Ferris before him, he's completely and utterly alone.
Where is everybody?
Damn it, Mike, stay in your own episode. So Embry's crew is just gone. Did they set off and leave him behind, thinking maybe he was dead? It doesn't make sense. He tries the radio, gets only static. He methodically tries to piece everything together, but has no luck cracking the mystery. He's their leader, damn it. How can he watch over them if he can't find them?
I'm responsible for you guys. Don't you understand? I'm responsible.
Now, up until now, we believe we're watching events unfolding in 1943 during World War II. But then, out of nowhere, a squadron of jets flies by overhead.
Wait a minute here. What are they? I've never seen any planes like that before. I've never seen any jets. Jets? Jet aircraft? How do I know about jet aircraft? This is 1943. There's no such thing as jet aircraft. But I know about it. I know about jet aircraft. F-106s, F-105, B-58s. I know all about it.
Wait, what the actual hell is going on? It's not 1943. It's the present. Embry knows what jets are, but doesn't seem to know anything else about his life since 1943. Is this a time warp? An interdimensional rift? A glitch in the Matrix? We don't know, but damn if it's not kooky as fuck. Embry then hallucinates his entire crew standing before him, laughing at his expense. The mirage dissipates, and he finally loses his shit rather spectacularly.
It doesn't make any difference. Because you're an illusion. You don't even exist.
There isn't a thing, not a single thing that's real. Oh, God. Oh, God, what's happening here? What's happening? Won't you let me in on it? Oh, please let me in on it, guys. Please let me in on it.
It's interesting to note that at the height of his breakdown, or depth of his breakdown, I guess, he finds himself reduced to asking God for help. It's only then, when he relinquishes his self-imposed sense of responsibility for his crew, that the nightmare finally ends. Now, I suppose one could find a religious message in there. I choose not to, but your spiritual mileage may vary. I don't think that was Serling's intent. Anyway, Embry wakes up in a hospital room in 1960. Now, it seems the lost King 9 was recently discovered intact in the African desert with no trace of its crew. When Embry saw the story in the paper, he went into catatonic shock. It turns out he was grounded with a fever and wasn't even on board when the plane went missing in 1943. And he's harbored intense guilt ever since, which led to his elaborate hallucinatory breakdown.
1943, African desert, and jet planes overhead. Just as if I had gone back there today. Did I? Did I go back? Did I go back to my plane?
In your mind. That's how you went back. Only in your mind.
So we have a perfectly rational explanation for everything, just like we did for Mike Ferris. But what isn't so easily explained is the fact that Embry's shoes are filled with sand. Wait, what? What? But no. Is the present day here and now just another level in Embry's dream world? Or did he have some sort of out-of-body astral projection type experience? Or was the power of his guilt so strong that it twisted and distorted the very fabric of time and space? Or is it just a bullshit left-field paradox that can't be explained? The episode ends on that note, so we'll never know for sure. But in this case, I don't really care because I love this episode. First and foremost, Embry is a much better character than Mike. I love how he's so pragmatic and level-headed early on when he's trying to figure things out, and then progressively less controlled and more raw as he cracks up. We're witnessing a highly disciplined, logical mind come absolutely unhinged, and Robert Cummings is straight up brilliant. His facial expressions are just perfect, and they match up beautifully with his inner monologue, which is actually inner thanks to the use of voiceover narration instead of the talking to oneself approach that really hamstrings Where Is Everybody. But you know, they actually could have gone that route here, and I think it would have worked. I think Robert Cummings is so good that he could have pulled it off. Plus, the writing is so much better this time around. The shot when he's drinking from the canteen, then sees the mirage of his co-pilot, and his face crumbles while he gropes for the ability to speak, water dribbling out of his mouth. It's really powerful. Robert Cummings really throws himself into the role fearlessly. He ain't holding back, folks. It's a crime he didn't get nominated for an Emmy for this. And I totally buy him as an Air Force captain, which it turns out he actually was in the reserves after World War II. During the war, he was a flight instructor. I know him best from his work for Alfred Hitchcock. He starred in Saboteur in 1942, and he co-starred in Dial M for Murder in 1954. And I've seen King 9 Will Not Return many times over the years, but I never noticed until now just how much he looks like Robert Culp, right? I can't be the only one who sees it. His final crack-up reminds me of Culp's crack-up in the Outer Limits episode The Architects of Fear. I'm a huge Robert Culp fan. I really wish he'd done a Twilight Zone, or better yet, several Twilight Zones. I should mention that Robert Cummings starred in a TV show called My Living Doll in 1964, in which he played an Air Force psychiatrist who is responsible for teaching a female robot, played by the impossibly hot Julie Newmar, how to be a perfect woman. Now, vague misogyny aside, it sounds a bit like a Twilight Zone concept, doesn't it? Military man cultivates AI to be more human, but it's not. It's a dumb sitcom that barely lasted one season. It's kind of like a proto I Dream of Jeannie in tone. The TV show, not the Twilight Zone episode. Anyway, My Living Doll is on Hulu if you're interested. It's nothing special, but the opening credit sequence is really fun. It's a clever mix of live-action animation. The production values in King 9 are top-notch. That's a real B-25 bomber, and it's almost a character in and of itself thanks to that creepy King of Hearts painted on its nose, wide-eyed and grinning as Embry gradually descends into madness. Cummings walks around the entire plane, crawls through the fuselage, then scouts around the nearby desert, then back to the plane, and it's all documented by some really great crane work. He squints against the sun, he winces against the blowing sand, he sweats profusely because, well, it's fucking hot. It's not the actual African desert, it's actually Owens Valley, California, but it works. There's such a gritty, tactile feel to it all, and a really nicely expansive sense of space. It looks real. And that sand in his shoes, well, that's not exactly a twist ending in it. When I covered the episode in my blog 6 years ago, I described it as a metaphysical wallop out of left field. It just sort of happens. It doesn't really connect to the narrative that's come before it in any meaningful way. But the ending doesn't stop it from being a great episode. Robert Cummings' performance and those gorgeous visuals more than save the day. I love it. Maybe not top 10 or 20, but not far off. Now, another highly successful aspect of the episode is the original music score by Fred Steiner, whereas Herman's Where Is Everybody score was serious in tone but not necessarily threatening, King 9 is downright ominous. It's even frightening in spots. Now, the episode is more or less a psychological thriller, but the music would be right at home in a straight-up horror movie. The opening cue sets the stage for what's to come. It's called Passacalista? Passacaligula? Shit, I don't know what that is or what it means. If only there was some kind of magical device for accessing information at the touch of a button. Oh well, this is a great opportunity for me to use a lifeline, so excuse me whilst I make a quick call.
Hello?
Hey, Doc, it's Craig. Now, your voice is on the air, so watch your fucking language.
All right.
Yeah. Folks, on the line with me is Dr. Reba Wissner, author of A Dimension of Sound, Music in the Twilight Zone, which is basically the holy Bible for those of us who obsess about all things music on the Twilight Zone. So, Doc, we're talking about King 9 Will Not Return, and I got myself all confused and flustered over the very first cue of the score. What is a Passacalrisian, and how does it relate here?
So, a Passacalia is actually a instrumental piece of music that came out of the Baroque period, i.e. 17th, 18th century. And really what it is a piece of music that has variations over a bass line. Kind of like if you think jazz, where you have this bass line, sometimes you have riffing over it with variations. The funny thing about this is that it's not really a Passacalia at all, because it doesn't have that repeated bass melody and it doesn't have the variations over it. So why Steiner chose to call it that, I don't really know. He doesn't make it clear. I'm thinking maybe he just needed something flashy to call it, and that's what he did, because all the other cues in the episode are kind of based on either the scripted elements or events, and then you've got Passacalia, flop.
Okay. Right before I called you, I described it as music for a psychological thriller, because, I listen to Twilight Zone music a lot. more often than I watch the episodes. So I didn't realize how scary this music is until I just listened to it on its own. I mean, it is really like kind of high strung, and I don't know. It's freaky.
It's funny that you talk about it as being music for a psychological thriller, because as you said that, I had an epiphany about it. And it's very rare that I get epiphanies now. Exactly. I hear the chorus of angels singing. Because with a quote-unquote true Passacaglia, you have this bass line, which we call an ostinato, which comes from the word obstinate comes from it, so stubborn. And really, Captain Embry is fixated on finding his crew and figuring out where he is and what happened. So, in a sense, Steiner is kind of setting that up.
Yeah, okay.
Something you'll see a lot in, say, the scores for Bernard Herrmann, or Whereas Everybody is also a definite one that has that, which we'll get to at some point.
Oh, actually, I already talked about that one, because that was earlier in this episode.
Sweet.
Okay, so this wasn't Steiner's first, was it?
Yes.
This is his first Twilight Zone score. Okay. And he went on to do a lot of fourth season stuff, which is probably one of the better things about the fourth season, because it's not all great. But I'm trying to think off the top of my head, like, what are some of his others? He did The Passersby, right?
Yes.
That is beautiful. I love that.
And he actually, if you have not done this, the Archive of American Television has some interviews with Steiner.
Oh.
And he talks about writing the score for The Passersby.
Is that online?
It is.
Oh. I'll get that from you, and I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful. He talks about all of the scores that he writes,
oh, wow, okay.
Including King 9, I believe. He talks about The Bard, which is great, and he talks about writing a tuba line for Jack Weston because Jack Weston's fat.
If Fred is listening, I can hear him cringing right
now.
Things. But yeah, I mean, in the entire catalog of Twilight Zone scores, I mean, I actually think King 9 Will Not Return is probably the most horrific. I can't think of another one off the top of my head that is just so relentlessly just scary. So I'm thinking that I'm going to play it at Halloween for the trick-or-treaters.
Oh my God. You really want to scare them, don't you?
I'm going to scare the hell out of these neighborhood kids. Get off my lawn! Okay. Well, Doc, thank you. This was very helpful. And okay, again, we're pronouncing it how?
Passacaglia.
Passacaglia. Passacaglia.
The G is silent.
Jeez.
You're Italian.
Okay. All right. So, Doc, thank you for coming on. I have no doubt we will be talking again in the very near future.
You got it.
All right. Thanks. Bye. One last note about the music. Original Twilight Zone scores were often pilfered for use in later episodes. The scores for the episodes that we're discussing this week, Bernard Herrmann's Where Is Everybody and Fred Steiner's King 9 Will Not Return, are actually tied for the most musical reappearances in the entire series. Cues from these two scores would show up in 12 future episodes each, so 22 future episodes total. Now, if my math seems off, it's because 2 of those future episodes include cuts from both scores, The New Exhibit and Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Now, I mentioned a few times that Serling wrote a short story version of Where Is Everybody after the episode was produced. I should probably explain. To promote/cash in on the series, Serling adapted a total of 19 of his Twilight Zone scripts for 3 paperback anthologies called, respectively, Stories from the Twilight Zone in 1960, More Stories from the Twilight Zone in 1961, and New Stories from the Twilight Zone in 1962. Now, King 9 wasn't one of them. However, it did get adapted to short story form, but not by Serling. 2 more paperback anthologies were published, Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone in 1963 and Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone Revisited in 1964. Both written by a guy named Walter B. Gibson. Between his two books, there were 26 short stories. 16 of those were Gibson originals, but 8 were adaptations of Serling scripts. One of them is called Return from Oblivion, which is basically King 9 Will Not Return, reduced down to a 6-page quickie. The only real notable difference is that it starts off with a scene of Embry giving his crew a pep talk the night before the fateful bombing run, laced with some pretty goofy fishing metaphors. Yeah, you heard that right. Now, in the present, when the news breaks that the King 9 wreckage was finally found, Embry is on a fishing boat when he has his breakdown. None of this adds anything of value to Serling's story, and as I read Gibson's story in preparation for this podcast, one word kept coming to mind. Why? So we're tackling these two episodes together because they share a number of similarities. Both depict individuals in complete isolation for inexplicable reasons, and both are ultimately revealed to be dreaming their respective circumstances. The plots are similar in structure, enough so that the episodes are basically variations on the same idea. I do feel that King 9 does a better job of scaling the tension upward. Mike's dream world is an average, maybe even a little bit idyllic town. Oakwood may as well be Homewood from walking distance, which is basically Serling's hometown of Binghamton, New York. Now, it's interesting to contrast Mike's dream world with Embry's, which is an undeniably hostile environment. It's endless desert, it's blistering heat. There's no movie theaters, no ice cream parlors, no mannequins to hit on, no nothing. Now, Embry harbors a deep guilt over the fate of his crew, so it makes sense that he would dream himself into such an unforgiving place. Now, as far as we know, Mike's just a normal guy who is nervous about his mission. So maybe Oakwood represents the security of the everyday and earthbound versus the giant unknown of outer space. But Serling doesn't go that deep, which is a bit of a shame. A bit more psychological probing and a bit less pointless monologuing would have gone a long way. Now, admittedly, there isn't a ton of depth in Embry's case either, but Robert Cummings' performance is complex and nuanced enough to more than cover that. And I guess I respond more strongly to the desert setting, because for me it's a truly alien environment. I've lived in the Pacific Northwest my entire life, so I've seen lots of towns like Oakwood, but I've never seen a vast, empty, and surreal landscape like Embry's desert in person. And it's easy for me to buy into Embry's situation because it looks so goddamn uncomfortable. Mike's just kind of window shopping around a quiet town, which actually sounds very calming. And Embry is clearly smarter than Mike. As he's naming off the possible explanations for what he's experiencing, he totally nails it.
The whole thing could be an hallucination.
I mean, he doesn't realize that he's just nailed it, but he's nailed it just the same. I've mentioned before that I was able to trace exactly when I saw certain episodes of The Twilight Zone for the first time by using the old TV listings archived at my local library. Now, I don't know when I first saw King 9 Will Not Return, but I do know when I first saw Where Is Everybody? It was November 12th, 1983. That weekend, I had a major flu bug and a pretty high fever. Now, I watched the episode in bed on my little 10-inch black and white TV, then spent the entire night fever dreaming myself wandering around in an abandoned town. I've had a few nights in my life where high fevers made me hallucinate things, but that's the earliest one I can remember. In more recent years, high fevers have caused me to believe that a chicken was loose in my bedroom and that my wife Teresa was slowly poisoning me. I actually kind of think that last one might be true.
Could be.
Folks, if I suddenly turn up missing, I'm just saying. So if we throw these two episodes into the ring and let them duke it out, which will emerge the victor? It's an easy pick for me. My money's on King 9 Will Not Return. Now, Where Is Everybody certainly has its merits, and it's admittedly got some swagger thanks to its whole first episode ever status, so it's not a straight-up beatdown. Let's say King 9 takes the belt, but not by a first-round knockout. The lovely and talented Lorraine Feather is a Grammy-nominated jazz singer, and she released an album called Tales of the Unusual in 2012, which contained a song called Where Is Everybody? And it's very obviously inspired by the Twilight Zone episode. Most of the lyrics actually comment on the action in the episode.
Who's that woman with the frozen grin? Man, that chick's only a mannequin. Where is everybody? Put a U.S. nickel in a payphone, one friendly voice, and I wouldn't be so alone. The number you have dialed is not a working number. The number you have dialed is not a number.
Ms. Feather actually left a comment on my blog a few years ago, indicating that she adores the Twilight Zone, so she's automatically cool. I mean, she's already cool since she's a jazz singer and stuff, but this is another level of cool. Now, I love jazz in all its various forms, well, except for smooth jazz. It is the official position of this podcast that Kenny G sucks. But my musical tastes extend wildly in all directions, well, except for country. I do have my limits. In my Google Play archive, you'll find lots of Miles Davis and John Coltrane, coexisting peacefully along the collected works of Depeche Mode, David Bowie, Radiohead, Frank Sinatra, Crowded House, Bjork, The Beatles, and Nine Inch Nails. About once a year or so, I go on a huge Nine Inch Nails binge. I'm actually in the middle of one of those binges right now, so that's pretty much all I've been listening to during my commute to and from work over the past couple of weeks. Which, now that I'm thinking about it, might account for my hostility in the workplace lately. You know, I might need to change it up a bit before my coworkers start hitting their panic buttons. But what does Nine Inch Nails have to do with the Twilight Zone? Well, Nine Inch Nails is basically one guy, Trent Reznor, and he is almost certainly a Twilight Zone fan. In 1999, he released a song called Where Is Everybody? And then also a Rolling Stone interview from that same year revealed that his video collection contained several Twilight Zone tapes. 10 years later, he put out an instrumental track called The Four of Us Are Dying, which is, of course, the title of another Twilight Zone episode. This can't be just a coincidence, right? Anyway, there's nothing really Twilight Zone related there outside of the title, but it's a nice little curio nevertheless. So I think we'll wrap it up for this week. And wow, I did not think this would run this long. If you've made it all the way to the end, congratulations. I do appreciate your patience. If anyone out there wants to touch base with us, you'll find us on both Facebook and Tumblr. Just do a search for @ZonePod and you'll find us. And if you do, like us or share us or whatever. And for a more direct connection, hit us up at zonepod@gmail.com. That's just one word, ZONEPOD. And if you find yourself looking at our little corner of the world on iTunes, feel free to leave a rating or review. I mean, I'll understand if you don't. I know you're really busy or whatever. But I would appreciate it. It's nice to get feedback. Oh, good feedback. Anyway, if you're just mean, then, maybe move along. So yeah, that's it for now. We'll be back next week to tackle 2 more episodes of The Twilight Zone. Until then, kids, play nice.